So, hey, everybody, welcome to Philly IGDA meeting for February 2022. I'm Adrian Sandoval. I am the chair of the Philadelphia chapter of the International Game Developers Association, which is a global organization that is dedicated to the enrichment and advocacy of game developers. Here in Philadelphia, we're dedicated to supporting our fast-growing professional network, as well as our active, very active Indian academics communities as well. If you'd like more information on the IGDA itself, please head over to igda.org. Consider becoming a member for various benefits, including an invite to the official IGDA Discord server, which gives you instant access to a professional network of over 1,000 developers from all around the world. Really, really great benefit there. Definitely recommend checking out that Discord server. For us here in Philadelphia, we hold monthly events such as this one on the second Tuesday of every month. So please be sure to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or you can check us out at the website, which is philly.igda.org. Keep up to date on the events that we have as they happen. Also, please be sure to check out our YouTube channel. We have recordings of previous meetings there that you can check out. Please consider subscribing. Whenever we have new content, you'll be able to check it out, hit the bell, all of those fun things that YouTubers typically tell you to do. We also have a Discord channel of our own, so you can reach out to us as well as the other members of Philly's vibrant game development community, and that is free to access for anyone in Philadelphia, regardless of IGDA membership status. So please be sure to get on the Discord if you haven't already. Information on that also available on our website and social media. Please note, we do have a code of conduct, which you can read in full at the website, but please keep in mind, all of our events and communities are meant to be safe, inclusive spaces, so please respect each other in your communication, whether it's a digital space such as this one, our Discord server, or in the event that we do an in-person event. Either way, that code of conduct counts, so please be sure to check it out, read it in full, and otherwise be respectful to everyone here. Thank you all so much. So tonight, I'm really, really excited to welcome Rachel Sima, producer over at Firaxis Games, whose work include titles such as the recently released and award-winning Life is Strange: True Colors, as well as Ben 10 Power Trip, which she worked on over at Philly's own PHL Collective. And on that note, she is also a former chapter chair and speaker for us here at IGDA Philly, so I'm really, really happy to have her meeting with us once again. Rachel?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your evening to join us. And thank you to Adrian and Rob and all of the board members at IGDA Philadelphia for inviting me again. It's always nice to come back and see everyone and chat. And I do hope that this will be, kind of a dialogue tonight, just sort of doing some slides, and feel free to throw questions and thoughts in the chat, and we will do a little bit of talking back and forth. Cool. So tonight I'm going to be talking about sustainable game development and does it exist? My experience with game development. I work as a producer at Firaxis Games, and so my stories and experience will be through the lens of someone who works as a little bit of a management role. But I also have a background in writing and design too. So I've done a little bit of everything, and at every level of game dev at this point. I've worked indie, AA, which is what I would consider Deck 9, which is where I worked on Life is Strange: True Colors. And then I work in what is officially, I think, a AAA studio right now for Firaxis, working on very cool projects. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So here we go. Also, I'm just going to say, I take image rights very seriously. And so I only use images that are Creative Commons licensed, but that actually limits you by a lot. So I just picked images that felt vaguely on topic, but also made me laugh. It's been a busy week, so that's been my approach for content for this. Okay, so with that out of the way, in November 2020, which was just over a year ago, I burnt out. There's a lot of reasons why I think I burnt out at that time and why it happened. But yeah, absolutely, without a doubt, I can say that happened to me in that exact month, in that exact year. Obviously, we are still living through the global pandemic that began that year. I wasn't really able to go out and see people. There wasn't a lot to do after work. I definitely worked too much because of that. I work in a passion industry. I really like this picture. I work in a passion industry, and so I have monetized my hobby of playing and making video games. Before I worked in game dev, like I made video games for fun. So, you know, that sort of took up one of the things that I really enjoyed. I'd just been given a really big new job at work. I wasn't working at Firaxis at the time. And so I had just taken on a lot more responsibility, and my role was changing. And how did I know that I burnt out was basically, you know, what I was thinking about when I put this talk together. So it started with I didn't really have a problem going to sleep, but I started waking up in the middle of the night. And it was like, you know, you wake up and you feel anxious and stressed. So because of that, I was tired basically all the time. And it was a deeper kind of tired than like, you need to take a nap. It was the kind of tired where like, you just feel totally empty. It made me grumpy. I was getting less good at my job because of how I felt. And being bad at my job made me feel anxious. I was constantly on edge and like setting these unrealistic expectations for myself, which just created this really harmful cycle of stress all day long. And I started to develop physical symptoms of stress. Weirdly, I started feeling dizzy all the time. That was a very strange sensation. And I lost my appetite. I remember making a doctor's appointment and talking to them and saying, you know, I don't know what's wrong. Like, it's just sort of been this weird onset of symptoms that don't really make any sense. And the woman I talked to was like, well, are you stressed? And I was like, it can't be stress. Like, no, I'm ill. Like, this is something that is wrong with my body. And she was like, I don't know, could be stress. And that was really like a horrifying thing to think, was that my body could be like experiencing so much physical distress from the way that I felt based on my job. Cynicism is in there twice. That is, okay, so I tried to find some of the like clinical symptoms of burnout, and cynicism seemed to be one. I don't know that I felt that quite as much. But weirdly, the thing that I noticed the most, and that everyone that I lived with at the time noticed, was that I would constantly do this thing where I would just walk around and I'd like, you know, run my hands through my hair, and I'd like put my hands behind my head and I'd just sigh. I'd just be like, and it was like I was out of breath from just like how stressed I was all the time. It was not good. But that was, you know, a very clear cut, like something in my life has to change here. I would say that this is not a uncommon situation for people to find themselves in, especially when they're like a few years into their career and you go through that like pain point of taking on more responsibility, or you have new expectations put on you. And overall, I think game development just has a bit of a burnout problem. It's interesting because I don't think that it's really tied to seniority, where you work, how many hours of work you do per week. It really seems like it can happen to you, you know, for any number of reasons, and you can't really foresee it. I think that particularly one of the anecdotes that I hear is when you move from being a student into full-time work, people often find this big change in the expectations that are put on them, stress levels, and that's a common time for people to experience burnout, which is also very frustrating because you're just starting your career. And so today I want to talk a little bit about, you know, how do you like manage burnout, what causes burnout, and also like how to avoid it, how to be proactive about it. And we'll talk a little bit about like finding the right place for you to hopefully avoid the specific kinds of things that would make you personally feel like you are going to burn out. So these are pulled from some sort of, clinical, I think it might have been like WebMD or something. But I was trying to figure out like, what do people think makes burnout happen? Because the number one thing that I hear is related to workload, which is people work too many hours. And I think that is related, but to be honest, something that's interesting is that I wasn't working more hours than I had worked in the past when I burnt out. In fact, there was parts of my career when I was in community college, I was working, I was running the IGDA. I was also a volunteer with Philly Game Mechanics. And so like every day I was working basically from the start of the day till the end. And yet that period of my life did not really cause burnout. I felt pretty motivated all the time. But it is one of the things that they cite can cause burnout. And for a lot of people, I think it probably does. The second thing was perceived lack of control. I think this one is actually one of the biggest that I see people deal with, which is not just that you might have too much work, but that you don't have any autonomy over the kinds of things that are happening to you, whether that's how much work is being given to you, whether you're getting a say in the kinds of work you're doing. And I think this extends over into your actual life too. Like, do you as a person outside of work feel like you have a lot of control? It kind of ties into reward here, but I think being early in your career and not making much money can be something that promotes burnout, because you don't have a lot of control over what you can and can't do outside of work. Maybe you're stressed about that as well. I think that's a big problem, especially for people who join maybe like entry-level QA roles where, historically those roles are very underpaid and work a lot of hours. Those are the kinds of situations that can cause burnout. Reward, so that's, raises, promotions, praise. How much praise are you getting from, the people around you for doing the work that you're doing? Having a community. So do you have support inside and outside of work? I think that's a really, really big one. Fairness. I was trying to figure out exactly what that might mean. My interpretation is like, do you feel like there's a lot of bias against you in the workplace? Do you feel like people are targeting you unfairly? You're being held to a different standard? Are other people doing less work than you're doing, but you are still, being judged at the same level? And then values. Do your values match up with the kinds of work that you're doing? So those are the things that I could find that people kind of have established might be the cause of burnout. And so we'll talk a little bit about how these things play into places you might choose to work. Now, this is a broad overgeneralization, but this has just been sort of my experience between indie, AA, and then AAA. And I certainly have not even worked in 1,000-person studios, right? Like an Epic or a Riot is basically its own category of work. So I can't really speak to studios of that size. But looking at the things that generally cause burnout, you'll notice that there are pros and cons for each level of the industry. And on top of that, they all kind of even out in different ways. I didn't do this on purpose. I just kind of was interested to see how I would judge these things. And I ended up coming up with, three pros and cons for each of these. So, indie games, you might be wearing 5 different hats, right? You might have 3 different jobs. I think the workload generally in indie can be quite a lot, especially when you're working like contract work or something where you have deadlines and not a lot of people to rely on. That's when I think the workload gets pretty crazy. But you do have a lot of control. I think more so than people working in massive studios. You got a lot more say in what things happen, how they happen, and the kind of work that you end up doing. I would say the reward can be great for indie, but it's different kinds of reward. Typically, you aren't getting huge bonuses or raises every year and things like that. So you have to kind of be happy with like ownership and things like that. I think indie games typically have great community. People usually become really good friends with their coworkers when you work at a 15 to 20 person studio. I don't think they always handle fairness super well, particularly for like marginalized people. It's an area that is pretty ripe for exploitation, unfortunately, just because there isn't a ton of oversight. But often people who work in indie games are working with their friends, they're working with people they like, and so values typically match up. You probably won't work at an indie studio that like, someone comes down from the heavens and tells you that you make NFTs now, right? Like that's probably not going to happen. So yeah, and then AAA, pretty similar, but I would say you're more likely to have more of like a reward than you would in indie, right? There's a little more money to go around. There's probably more growth opportunities, but you might not align so well with values. That was my experience, at least. You have more chance that you like work with a publisher or licensing partners. And so you might be a little less aligned overall with like how people would like you to make games and about what. And then weirdly, I'm saying AAA has a pretty good workload balance. That certainly isn't true everywhere, but I think you do typically have a more specialized niche. And so typically you aren't being given, the work of 15 different people. You might be given too much work, but at least it's too much work for like your discipline and your job. Much less control, I think, over the comings and goings of a 100-person company, right? You don't get as much say in the kinds of work that you do. You're put on a project a lot of times and, project dates slip, things change, and you probably get told, at the end of that process. I think a lot of AAA game studios probably have really strong communities, but I think you lose some of that really tight-knit group dynamic. And then I'm saying AAA is a little more fair. I think generally you've got more robust HR departments and you've got a little more oversight into the process of like how someone goes from mid-level to senior and things like that. And then last, values. I think, again, lots of people work at AAA companies that they feel really good about, but it's one of those things where you probably have a little less of a chance of feeling like you'll agree with every aspect of the kinds of things that your company does. So the main question is like, how do you avoid burnout, right? If you're going to go into the game industry or you work in the game industry now, a lot of the advice you get is work less or like self-care, go take a bubble bath. But that has varying levels of like how realistic it is and also how effective it is. I did overcome burnout, thankfully. It took me a long time. I'd say it probably took about 6 months to overcome the physical aspects of it. And probably only a few months ago, I feel like I really got out of the mental aspects of like feeling lethargic and uninterested in doing like side projects and hobbies and things like that. And I've had periods of time where I have worked really crazy hours or I have owned a lot of responsibility at work and I didn't burn out. So I'll just talk about sort of my experience and the things that I heard from other people that I talked to prepare for this. And yeah, hopefully some of this is helpful. I'm trying to stay away from the things that everyone says. This has been a big one for me in overcoming burnout. but I think it's a good preventative measure too. So, you know, especially when you first start working in games, when you get off of work, you're probably going to be absolutely exhausted, right? It's like that feeling when you start kindergarten and like kids come home and they immediately take a nap because their brain is like, I just learned 5,000 new things today. I've experienced 700 new sensations that I never have. And so, yeah, I think it's very easy to fall into a trap of finishing work and then going home and watching TV, or, you know, relaxing and not really doing anything for yourself. And I think that sometimes you need to do that, absolutely. But I think you need to build a little bit more of like a robust structure to your life so that work does not take over your whole mental headspace, right? What I found was I would get off work, I would, you know, feel so exhausted. I would sit and, you know, watch mindless YouTube videos or binge a TV series. And then I'd go to work the next day and I wouldn't feel like I had rested at all. I didn't feel like I'd actually like mentally recovered from the last day of work. I also picked this image because I have no idea what is in those people's glasses. It's like milk with a pile of chocolate, I guess, but it just made me laugh. Like that looks like the most disgusting drink I've ever seen. So all right, let's see. Cool. This is related, right? Find what gives you meaning outside of work. This is kind of, I think, what carried me through periods when I like started in the game industry and I was working crazy hours and I was trying to like prove myself and get a lot done. That I had community around me that gave me a lot of meaning. For me, it was definitely like working with community organizing. So running IGDA events, networking with people and talking about how they ran their IGDA department, and also working with Philly game mechanics. Those were things that gave me a lot of meaning outside of work and made me feel like the work I was doing was impactful because I could see how it impacted the community. And so for me, that was, I think, what kept me afloat outside of work. For you, this can be, I don't know, anything, right? Like raising your kid, training your dog, a really cool puzzle that you're working on. But I think at some point, everyone who works in the game industry is going to wake up and have been working for too many hours this week and go, you know, how is this worth it? How is it worth it to wake up and go make pixels do a thing on a screen, right? It's not worth it to like drain this much of your life force away for that. So you need something that gives that back and can rejuvenate you and feel like you're back and ready to make cool things happen with pixels the next day. This has been another really big one that I like just figured out, or at least I knew I should do it, but I didn't really understand how impactful it was until I actually had friends that did not play video games. I think this is agreed. Having friends is fire. That's why I also added that don't play the same video games. So I think that often people who work in games, we move a lot, we change jobs a lot, people get laid off, people switch industries, all that fun stuff. And you work with the same people for lots of hours a week, right? At least 40 hours a week, you're hanging out with the people that you're coworkers with. And I've always been friends with my coworkers. It doesn't matter where you work, that will inevitably happen. But it's really good to have friends who are completely removed from your work and your hobby of playing and making video games. It's sort of like how people, you know, talk about getting a therapist, and the benefit that it gives them is that that person has no real investment in like what happens in your life, right? They're not going to like dislike you as a person because you tell them that you did something mean. It's the same kind of thing where I have friends that I met. I've been doing rock climbing a lot recently, and I have friends. It's a very social activity. I've met a lot of people through that, and they're like doctors, and they or like artists, and they don't play video games at all. And they ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them that I play video games, and they're like, or I tell them that I make video games, and they're like, cool, okay. And then we talk about something else. And that's actually very refreshing, to not really have that be part of our dynamic. Yeah, it's nice to have friends that you can just, you can totally check out of like the fishbowl of game development with them. Yeah. Oh, also, hold on, let's see. Yeah, I really liked this photo because, yeah, these women just look really pumped about eating salad together. I'm trying to add commentary to my choices. And this one is just hilarious because who would take a nap like that? Like this woman, she like, I don't know, you'd wake up and you'd feel insane if you fell asleep like that. Okay, cool. So focus on your key habits. This one's actually really good. This has been very helpful for me. When you do find yourself in these situations where life is really chaotic, you feel like there's too much, you're overwhelmed, executive function is running low. I'm in this boat not unoften. So, this is common for me. It's important to focus on a few things that you keep as your core habits. It's totally unrealistic to be like a single functioning person who's gonna like do their laundry, cook every meal, eat healthy, match their hit their budget every month, work out, go to sleep at the same time. You can't do all of those things. I mean, some people can, but not when the pressure's on, And so pick a few things that you feel like you do not want to compromise on. And this woman has given up. She took a shower. Her key habits that she maintained, even when life was crazy, was she was like, I'm gonna take a shower. She took that shower and then she immediately fell asleep. My key habits have been eating meals at all the meal times of the day. I love to eat and I'm not going to compromise on that. So do not try and message me at noon because I will be on lunch. I don't let work overflow into that, or I try not to. I try and see another person at least once a week. That seems it seems like a very low bar, but honestly, in this day and age, sometimes that's kind of a struggle. And also I always go to bed. It's like, as soon as I'm tired, I'm like, it's time for bed, but I never go to sleep past like 12:30. And that's probably been like the single biggest thing that's helped me out, is not borrowing from tomorrow's energy because there's something I want to do today. I've never regretted going to sleep at a human hour, waking up at a human hour, and then doing the rest of my work tomorrow. Things always go better when I like get 8 hours of sleep. But yeah, just about everything else is on the chopping block for me when things are getting crazy. Exercise, laundry, sweeping my apartment, that's just things that don't happen sometimes, and that's okay. Touch grass was it kind of a joke, but not really. Especially if you're not traveling right now, people aren't going out to the bar every weekend. You really need to leave your house. This is a subtweet at me also. I like to go outside in the morning and after work, right? Like I spend like 5 minutes outside. Sometimes I go and I get the mail. Sometimes I take out my trash. But going outside for me is a good signifier of like the day is beginning and the day is ending for like work. And that's been really helpful. But also there's lots of awesome studies about how, being out in nature, looking at a tree, touching grass, actually really does reduce your stress levels. And it's one of those things that's like, you hate that it's true, like when you exercise and you feel a lot better and you're like, oh man, that's awful, because it means that like, oh yeah, I could feel better anytime I want. I just have to exercise. But I hate that, because you don't really have an excuse now. And yeah, sometimes you don't want to go outside, but it is actually really good for you. All right. So then I'll talk a little bit about things that are like work related. Those things were like mostly life related, right? Outside of work. And yeah, these are things that aren't just like work less or ask for a raise. I mean, you should do that, but that's not all the advice I have. Yeah, so everyone suggests therapy. This one's actually more of like just sort of an aside. I also thought this was a really funny like stock image representation of therapy. The therapist looks like he is, I don't know, interrogating that child. But yeah, everyone suggests therapy as like a cure for burnout and mental health. But therapy is not super accessible for most people. The only reason I'm calling it out is because you should think about how you process stress and feelings and thoughts, and think about whether therapy like would be helpful for you. For me personally, I am a verbal processor. Like when I have a problem or I'm stressed about something, I like immediately pick up the phone and call someone, and start talking to them and talking through my problems to like get my mind sorted. And so for me, like that's been incredibly helpful, is having like talk therapy as a resource. You can still do this with your friends, but it's nice to have someone who won't get sick of you, mostly because you're paying them. But yeah, and also a lot of the symptoms of burnout overlap with depression, and I do think it's a good idea to make sure that you understand what you're experiencing, because if it goes on for a long time and you feel like you're doing the things that should alleviate your burnout symptoms, yeah, I think that's a good time to call upon the services of a professional. Cool. Yeah. So this is something that I learned about actually like last week. There on the left is a chart that shows what it is referred to as like the 4 tendencies, and it's like a self-help book, which I read a lot of those because I'm kind of a dork, but some of the content is actually pretty good. You just have to sift through all of the garbage to like find the things that are helpful. And one of my producer friends actually pointed this out to me the other week, and I was like, oh, this is actually a really nice way to think about how you as a person manage expectations. So there's 4 different categories. There's the upholder, the obliger, the rebel, and the questioner. And you can read there what they mean, but it's basically like, how do you deal with outer expectations? So your boss saying like, I need this report, but you have to do it over lunch on Monday, versus your own inner expectations. So like every Monday, I'm going to go to the gym over lunch. And how do you balance those things? And for me, I am definitely an obliger, which means that I meet outer expectations and I do not uphold my inner expectations. I find it very difficult to keep habits. I let things slip and slide all over my schedule. I don't set very good boundaries for myself when people expect things of me. And one of the side effects of this, in my experience, has been that I will take on too many things. And then slowly I start to resent the fact that I have taken on too many things and that I'm overwhelmed. And then I reach a breaking point. And at that breaking point, in general, people often quit their jobs. They often, I don't know, if you are maybe not the best kind of person, they might like have an outburst. People start getting irritable and resentful basically of their situation. And so I just kind of wanted to call this out, like think about the ways that you manage expectations, stress, all of that. And yeah, it could lead you to some good realizations about ways you need to set better boundaries and all that good stuff. And then, yeah, on the other side, think about how you react to stress. Like inevitably, you will find yourself in stressful situations, particularly in this industry. Things change all the time. You might not have insight or control over what kind of things change. You just kind of have to go with the flow. But you will experience stress from time to time. And I realized personally that I am a bit of a control freak when I'm stressed. So that's something that I've been trying to overcome. I think overall, though, like these are the kinds of things to think about to prevent yourself from getting in situations where you feel frustrated, resentful, cynical, is thinking about the ways that you react to bad situations that you're put in. Because ultimately, you cannot control the world around you. You can only really control, the ways that you react to the world and the places that you put yourself in. This is another interesting one. I think this relates particularly to my experience as a producer. If you aren't familiar, producers are kind of like a mix between project managers and people managers, often work inside of teams and facilitate work getting done, things like that. And so like a lot of things overlap there with like a traditional manager or project manager. And so I like to, get wisdom from those. This is actually an old Harvard Business Review article from the 90s. It was called "Who's Got the Monkey?" And the article itself is like pretty outdated in my opinion. It uses a lot of language that I think is kind of icky about like workers and, the way that you interface with them as a manager. But it does have some good points, which is, alongside managing your reactions to things, you should also manage how much responsibility you take on personally, and not just the things that, are part of your job, but the things that people bring to you. So, for example, especially in a cross-disciplinary field like game dev, people bring you problems. And often when they bring you a problem, they are secretly putting some work on your plate, right? In this case, we're going to call that the monkey. So for example, someone might come to me, the producer, and say, hey, this ticket for, this Jira ticket is out of date. And what they have just done is give me implicitly a job, right? And maybe it is my job to go update the Jira ticket. But I feel like we often don't think about the fact that when we say things like that to people, we're sort of like throwing a monkey on their back and then running away, right? And so this was a really powerful change that I made, which was when I had conversations like that with people, I started noticing the monkeys they were putting on my back, and I would give them the monkey. I would return the monkey to them, right? I would say, okay, that Jira ticket is out of date. What I would like you to do is go update that Jira ticket. And I would like you to try. And if you feel confused or you don't succeed, or, you've run into a challenge, come back and we'll figure it out together. But heading off all those monkeys being put on my back by other people has allowed me to do way more of the actual impactful pieces of my job that I was not able to do in the past. And that's been really helpful. I hope that helps some of you. Yeah, let's see. And then I just want to talk a little bit about like, are passion jobs doomed from the start, right? Like, can you work in a job that is what you love and not slowly learn to hate it? Frankly, like I think so. I know there's that saying that's like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And then lots of people switch to that to be like, do what you love and you'll work all the time, and other variants of that. But I know a lot of people who really like their jobs, including me. Like I very rarely am not excited to go to work in the morning. Yeah, I know a lot of people in the game industry who are like relatively well-functioning adults who like their jobs. And to be fair, I think a lot of them are 30 plus. They have spouses and probably some, they're more senior, so they probably have like some discretionary income or money. And so, maybe the aspects of game dev that are really the worst will hit you when you're like young and single and, living in a kind of crappy apartment and all that fun stuff. There's definitely exploitation in the game industry, like no question. I think that, passion industries are blighted by a sense that like you should feel honored to have this job. That's certainly not the culture everywhere, but, I think entertainment in particular has that problem. But yeah, I think people who are passionate and are able to self-manage with some of the things that we've talked about today are better off than people that don't really like their jobs or don't really care about the kinds of work that they do. Yeah, like I could go work for 35 hours a week as a, project manager for like a lawnmower company, producing, making lawnmowers or like mobile apps or something. But I don't think I would find that particularly fulfilling, honestly. Here's a couple things to think about. Also, I have some friends, who work in the industry, and we've talked about like not really being able to tell whether it's burnout or not that you're experiencing. And so, yeah, is it your job, or is it sort of your state of mind about your job that's the problem if you're experiencing, discontent with the place you're at? For me, when I'm thinking about switching jobs, I usually do an interview. Like I'll take, one of the recruiter emails that I get and I say, okay, sure, let's do it. And after interviewing, usually I'm like, no, actually my job is great. I definitely don't want to work at that job, right? And if you start interviewing and you do think other jobs are better, that's great. You're probably in a position where it's time to switch companies. But if you're feeling miserable and other companies also aren't seeming great, then it's probably an internal change that you need to make. Either figuring out whether like this is the industry you want to work in, or are you just sort of unhappy based on, non-work related things. Do you like the work that you're doing? Particularly if you're in like indie or AA, I think you're in a good spot to like try some other work. Taking on small pieces of like another discipline and seeing if that helps to sort of reframe your mind and reboot your creativity. Obviously, lots of people in the game industry are artists of some variety. You can definitely have creative or art block based on burnout, but I think sometimes it's just you're working on content you don't really care about. You need to try something new. And also, like, do you want to be a creative in the game industry? I started as a writer and I worked in design for a while, but I'm very thankful that I didn't end up pursuing that long term because honestly, I think I would have burnt out. I don't think I'm the kind of person who has creativity on demand for like 40 hours a week for however many decades of my life. And there's definitely pros and cons to whether, you're going to be in a creative role or not in the game industry. And then last, do you like the people that you work with? I think this is like a really big aspect of whether you will feel like you enjoy your job and your work or not. You spend tons of hours a week with these people, especially bad managers can really sour your job, even if you enjoy the work that you do. And so in conclusion, work to find meaning for yourself outside of your job. Definitely the game industry can be all consuming. And I know lots of game devs who just sort of been sucked into this as their like identity. But I think it's most healthy if you can have pieces of yourself that you value and find important outside of making video games. Get out of the fishbowl of like daily game development. Make sure that you have friends who can help pull you out and make you realize that like missing a milestone or shipping that weird animation in a game is not the end of the world. No one will die. Becoming friends with doctors made me realize that the stakes of my job are certainly lower than I could have ever imagined. You know, they're like, what did you do today? And I'm like, I sent an email and it didn't sound good. And they're like, oh, a man died in my arms today. And I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, right. My job is not that important. Prioritize self-management, not only self-care. So yes, taking a bubble bath is great. Going for a walk is awesome. But I think you also need to be diligent with yourself about realizing your triggers, the things that make you maybe not the person that you wish you were day to day, and making sure that you're reflecting on yourself and thinking about ways that you can make your situation better, even internally. And then last, understand how your work environment will impact you. Thinking about that slide of like, what are the pros and cons of indie, AA, and AAA? Make sure you're picking jobs that actually align with the kinds of work you want to do. It's certainly a luxury, but you know, when you're considering your mental health and your long-term career as a game developer, I think it is important to take those things into consideration. And that is it. Yeah. So here's my contact info if you would like to reach me for any reason. That's where you can find me. Cool. Adrian, do you want to?
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you again. I thought that was some really, really fantastic information. I particularly like the thing about like self-management, not just self-care, because I think you're absolutely right that like there's such a like emphasis on self-care that there are other things that you can be doing that can help out. So I thought that was like super, super fantastic. Really, really cool. I just want to say to everybody really quickly, we are now in the Q&A portion of the night, and we have a good bit of time for QA. So if you haven't seen it yet, at the bottom of your Zoom, there actually is an area where you can actually ask questions. So let's start populating that with some questions. We got a lot of people here, so I'm hoping for some really good active Q&A. While we're waiting and getting started, I guess I will kick it off. I really only had one big question, at least pertaining to the topic at hand, and maybe I'll come up with more as people are asking questions. Actually, one just did come in here, and I'll get to that in a second. So I guess my big question here is, you mentioned that one of the important things is to kind of start to build more of a community around yourself, particularly ones that are not doing the same things that you are doing or liking the same things that you like. You also mentioned that right now things are a little bit tricky for folks. Not everyone is able to get out as much. So I'm wondering if you have any tips on how to kind of build those communities, kind of do other hobbies with other people during times like what we're in right now with the pandemic, or even for other reasons that people aren't able to get out.
Yeah. Well, I think being here is a good first step, right? Like meeting other game devs and all that good stuff. And I think Philly Game Mechanics is still doing, you know, monthly meetups and all that. Yeah, I think that for me, finding a community of people outside of game development is not something that I would have been able to do when I was like just starting out as a student. Like I wouldn't have been intentional about it, I guess I would say. But if you are in that situation, I do think, I guess, I don't know, I don't want to go on a tangent, but like, I think that when you become an adult, it's like a very big change in the way that you make friends. You're no longer like stuck in one place for hours and hours a week, where like in high school, you like became friends with people because you sat next to them in Spanish and, you know, you might as well become friends. You have to make time to become friends with people. And so doing something consistently is very important. Like for me, I started indoor rock climbing, and I was just like, I don't know, this is a thing that you can do with a mask on. You don't have to touch anyone, but you're getting exercise. And then one day I was there and they had like, you know, a queer climbing club, and I met a bunch of people who were there. And since then I've gone to that, you know, every month, and I've met quite a lot of friends through that. So I don't know, it takes work to make friends, and that's kind of the worst truth, but yeah.
Absolutely. So we have questions populating
Yes.
up. Did you want to read them yourself, or you want me to kind of like go one by one? You can do
I
either
can read
format.
them.
Okay, you go
Yeah.
ahead. You go right ahead.
First off, Renee, are we related? Like, nobody has Sima as a last name. What? I was like, did I ask a question? Yeah, that's
I am
crazy.
also confused.
We'll have to connect outside of this and figure it out. Okay, how did you make the switch from doing creative work to producer work? I think, I don't know, that's an interesting thing. Yeah, so I worked with Adrian actually when I made that switch at a indie mobile game company. And I don't know. I think that mostly I just started doing it and making a lot of mistakes, but this is not a good answer. But yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, I knew that it was going to be like a better long-term fit and more sustainable long-term for me to do work that like was adjacent to game dev, but wasn't exactly, quite as like creatively demanding. Yeah, and you can learn a lot of skills in game production by reading. There's like handbooks for being a game producer on Amazon that you can buy and read, and you won't know everything, but it's a really good intro. Okay, cool. Let's see. What was the most unhealthy job you've had in the industry? I don't know that I'm going to answer that, but I'll give a piece of advice. I would say, and this isn't advice that's like targeted to my own experience, but just things that I've seen anecdotally. Don't necessarily pick jobs based on the games that you enjoy. So just because you really like, I don't know, World of Warcraft, doesn't mean you should necessarily go work at Blizzard, right? Enjoying and playing games is very different than making games. So find the kind of games that you would like to make. Cool. Let's see. What was the best work experience you've had? Oh, I don't know. I think that weirdly making kids games for Cartoon Network at PHL Collective was like a blast largely. And I often have, wistful memories of like, man, I used to like do QA for our VR games, and we made this cool food truck game at one point for We Bare Bears, the TV show, and that was probably like the highlight of my career. That was super fun. I find the pressure to get out of a burnout seems to prolong the burnout. Yeah, because it usually has a negative connotation. Is it maybe better to accept that sometimes as someone in a creative field, you're not inspired enough to produce any type of work? Yeah, I think that's totally true. You're going to have slumps, like absolutely. I would say like the last 3 months for me, just between the pandemic and it being winter, and I don't know, it's been really busy and putting a lot of my mental effort into work. I just haven't really wanted to do a lot of other things. And I think it's a little different for me because I don't have to like sit down and design a character for work every day. But I definitely think that you should understand that like as humans, people have, periods of time where they're more or less inspired or more or less productive. And I think the difference is, are you burnt out or are you going through like a period of rest? If you're burnt out, I think you should take steps to try and remedy that. But I think if you're going through a period of rest, like, yeah, be great. What's the word? Be graceful with yourself and be, kind, and don't put too much pressure on it. Dan asks, you mentioned you feel the need to take control when you get stressed. When is that a bad thing? And how do you pull back when you acknowledge those situations? That's a good question. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think being a control freak is my stress response, because I'm like, well, what things can I make sure, go the way that I want them to go? So I think it's one of those things where you do have to be very reflective. and build time into your day, your week, your month to like sit down and think about the way that your days are going. Like I like to journal, I like to meditate weekly, all that good stuff. But I think there's aspects of that stress response that, like, I think you're implying are like actually really good for my job as a producer, that I've become really good at taking control of situations. I think it's bad when I take on too many things and then I get overwhelmed and it just exacerbates the whole stress problem. What is your process to norm roles in which monkeys you should give back and which monkeys you should take on? Okay. So I think that, yeah, that's something that you develop a eye for over time, I think. But for me, I try and be very, very critical about what work must be done by me and must be done right now. I think this changes as like your seniority changes, right? Like as an assistant producer, I was never saying like, oh, I can't do that right now. Can you? Because your job is to take on a lot of the like small things that are overflowing. But now that my job is more about like leadership and making sure something big gets done, I have to be very critical about like, well, can I do this? Because if I do take this on, it means I can't do something else. So I guess my rule of thumb is I take on the things that if I didn't take them on, they either wouldn't be done correctly or I guess wouldn't get done at all or on time. And the other things, I try and find the best person to take on that work, the person who has the bandwidth and all that good stuff. When looking for jobs, do you have some red flags we should look out for regarding studios that might be more likely to cause burnout? Have you noticed anything that studios tend to take advantage of workers or prioritize work-life balance, etc., seem to have in common or put into or leave out of job postings? Yeah. I gave a talk, I think it was for Drexel's game program earlier this year or last year. And one of the things I mentioned was like, look at how specific the job posting is. And if not the job posting, then like when you do the interview, look to see how specific they are about what work you're going to be doing. I find that studios that have very vague job descriptions for their like job listings often don't really know what they're hiring for. And like their hiring managers aren't really sure what they're going to do with that person once they arrive. And there's really nothing worse, I think, than having a job where nobody else knows what you're supposed to be doing. You don't know what you're supposed to be doing. They just know that they need you there. And yeah, I think you end up just taking on a million like little pieces and weird little things. And you don't get a lot of praise or reward for that kind of work. So I think that can lead to burnout. What drew you to the producer role in game dev? I don't know. I kind of fell into it, honestly. Like I said, Adrian and I worked together at a small company. Our project manager left and I was like, I think that's the kind of job that I would like. So I pivoted from I guess I'd call it a design role at the time. And I moved into a producer role, but like a very light producer role. What I do now is very different than what I did then. But production can be a lot of things. It can be team management. It can be project management. It can be more of like a business type job where like you are managing contracts and all that. Right now, I do a lot of outsource management, which is its own like fun beast. I'm the cinematic producer at Firaxis, so I make the cool movies that play in your games. But yeah, ultimately I get to work with really awesome, really talented people, and I get to help them make the best content that they can. So I like that. If you are selfish and only care about your own well-being and the time management, should you put monkeys on other people's backs? You know that saying that's like, if you want something done right, do it yourself. I don't actually believe that, but I do think in a lot of cases that is kind of true. And eventually that will catch up to you. Like if all of your responsibilities, you outsource them, I think you might end up not having great performance reviews just based on the quality of the work that you outsource. Who is the correct love interest choice for Life is Strange True Colors? Okay, so there's actually 3 options in Life is Strange True Colors. And if you haven't played it, the basic premise of the game, and this is not a spoiler, this was in marketing materials, but cover your ears if you don't want to hear it, is you play as a girl who was in foster care. She got separated from her brother. She separated from her parents, and she goes to this town in Colorado to live with her brother. Her brother dies immediately after she shows up. And now she's in this town and she's trying to solve the mystery of his death. While you're there, there's potential love interests that you can befriend as you solve this mystery. And the right answer is that Alex Chen, the main character, definitely should not be getting into any relationships over the course of Life is Strange True Colors. It doesn't make any sense in that period of her life to get a love interest. I don't know. I'm just choosing this because it's like the different option. But I am probably pro Steph Gingrich. Ryan and Steph are the options, but I always go for Steph. I do like that game allows you to choose no one as your love interest, though. I think that's a pretty unique option. Okay, and let's see. Second question, if you have time, is it worth it to do the content grind for writing? Yeah, I think game writing has become a much better job than it was in the past. In the game industry, I have a lot of friends who are writers, and yeah, you find the right studio and there's really good jobs for game writing. Speaking towards like, how do you get those jobs? I do think it is a lot of like, write a ton of content, get better and better at writing, write twine games, pair up with people at game jams, write the content for those, get really good at writing like barks and one-off dialogues and stuff like that. And then, yeah, you're competing with a lot of people, like a lot of jobs in game dev. It is probably one of the more like coveted roles in the industry. But yeah, I don't think that it's quite as, I don't know. Like I think it's become more valued in the last few years than it was as a discipline previously. So I think it's worth it. Cool. I think that's all the questions.
Oh. I was waiting for this question to come up.
Do I have anything to do with the garden gnomes in Life is Strange? I don't. Well, no, I don't think I wasn't there when the garden gnomes were first put in the game, but we did a lot of content with the garden gnomes that I think would not have existed if I wasn't there.
There's quite a lot of garden gnomes in True Colors, and we were playing it. We were thinking, I wonder how much this is Rachel's fault. You have a brand, Rachel. I'm sorry.
It's true.
Hey, Rob.
I have one question. How many emails are in your inbox, and how many of them are you going to deal with tonight before you go to bed?
Like emails I just got, or just like in general?
What's in your inbox in general, and how many are you going to try to deal with before you go to bed, or are you not at all?
Well, my personal email is a trash fire. I don't even try and address that. My professional email, I probably have 57 is my guess, how many emails I have in my inbox. I work with people from Vietnam to the Czech Republic, so I get emails all day, every hour. I do not check my email every hour of the day. So I will probably deal with none of them before I go to sleep.
That's the correct answer.
That's right.
That is absolutely the correct answer. You talked about doing the outsourcing stuff. I know your talk tonight has been about, a sort of bigger picture balance and health and whatnot. But I am sort of curious on the challenge of coordinating and producing teams internationally. I've done it myself in the past, and communication can be challenging. So I'm curious, sort of, do you have some prime tips or toolkits that you use to keep your teams in sync and in good communication so that you get what you expect from your teams?
Yeah, outsourced producing is its own beast of a discipline. There's outsourced managers, there's people who do this, for their primary job. I'll just preface and say that's not really my background. Like, I am a cinematic producer who is doing outsourcing. But I think that for me, the key is really good documentation. What you really don't want to do is play like tag, telephone, snail mail between people in, Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia. That's never fun to be like the post office. So the more things that you can write out in advance and get ahead of people's questions, build repositories for where they can find information, all that is really, really the key, I think, to staying sane.
Very cool.
Thanks. We have another Q&A.
Let's see. Jeffrey asks, I have a question, but I think it's way too involved. Well, we're in it now. How can we contact you to maybe even discuss sometime? I'm really interested in specifically, sorry, I can't read. It's been a long week if you can't notice, or if you haven't noticed. Whew. All right. How can we contact you to maybe even discuss sometime? I'm really interested specifically since your situation with burnout is kind of like a reverse of mine. Not sure if Q&A is the best forum for that. Yeah, I think you can contact me at the places I mentioned. My email is my first name and then the letter C and then my last name. And you can find me at Rachel_Sima on Twitter. And yeah, feel free to message me and we can chat. I'm happy to talk about anything.
I'm muted. Karen sends Brewster love because notice Brewster in the background.
Yeah, I've got all sorts of stuff back here. A lot of Waluigi merch. I don't know that you can see that, but yeah, somewhere down there is Waluigi. And
Waluigi's shrine somewhere.
Animal Crossing. Yeah. And yeah, Gritty is here. There he is. Yep.
All the wahs in the background. Nice. And also good that you have Gritty and keeping that Philadelphia
yeah, absolutely.
You're alive even though you're away from us now. Anyway, yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. So if there's no other questions, I guess we are it for the night. But like, that was like so much good information, like definitely a good good quantity of information packed into a tight space of time. So thank you again so much for this, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming. I can't believe so many of you came out. I really appreciate it. I'm flattered.